Hello. So I wanted to take you through a new instrument I've been working on, which I call the Polar Vortex. So you can see on the right-hand side I have the Launchpad Pro, and one of the things about the Launchpad Pro is it's a grid-based controller, which lends itself towards um, some common assumptions like each grid square represents one note. So with this, I wanted to kind of break out of that a little bit. And so what I did was um, made an instrument that's based on polar coordinates. So the very center of the device, this ring right here, represents a center point around which the notes orbit. And then there's also attraction where things are pulled toward or pushed away from that center point. So the idea is that rather than having a button correspond to a note, it corresponds to the path that energy would take if it were being pulled from that point to the center or pushed away from the center. Um, so I'll show you some examples and you'll kind of get the idea, I think. If I put my finger here, you can see that it travels around, and the way it works is the actual energy is tracked as a series of points heading toward the center, and then it's represented by displaying whatever portion of the energy fits within a given square. So for example, if I had something between these two, it would have part of the shading here and part of the shading here to indicate that there's something kind of between the two, or partially in each of them. So it's based on the amount of energy. So the harder I hit, the more energy there is. So if I hit very softly, you'll notice it doesn't seem to get as far or fill up as much. If I do more fingers, you can see that there's more energy that travels through. And then you can also hear that there's sound associated with this. So I use Tone.js and I use an FM synthesizer, and the pitch is lower on the downswing here and higher on the upswing. So if I were to start up here, you can hear that it started high, went low, and just kept going around. And then if you have headphones on, you probably can hear that notes on the left sound like they're on the left, and when it goes to the right, it pans to the right ear. So it took advantage of a little stereo effects. So right now this is just with the defaults, and you can see on the left side of the web interface that the rotation is basically 30 degrees per update cycle. So there's maybe 4 a second. And it's like a record player. The rotation is 30 degrees regardless of whether you're close to the center or further out. It's not exactly like orbital mechanics. It's more like if you had a yo-yo lying on a record player and you were pulling on the string from the center. So it's good for representing some things, and I'll show you a few examples here, but it's not like a orbital mechanics or anything. So I'm going to turn down the attraction to 0 and then show you. You can see that there's some energy because it never falls into the center. It's never garbage, well, you could call it garbage collected. It's never removed. So because it's not leaving the environment, like being pushed outward or collapsing into the center, it just hovers, and it's too low for you to hear. But if you keep building up, you end up with kind of this swarm of energy. And then all you have to do to clear it is either increase or decrease the attraction. So I just pushed it out, which is, I'm going to increase that a bit, show you some examples. So you can also have repulsion, like push away from the center. And then you can change the amount of rotation. If I turn that way down, it becomes kind of a different kind of instrument. Oops. So, I don't have to adjust something here. All right, it's stuck. Hang on. There's a bug that I haven't fixed yet with the attraction. So anyway, I wanted it to be, okay, so there we go. So I'm going to turn the rotation way down so that it's not rotating at all. And in that scenario, there's just attraction. There's just pulling. Toward the center. So if you start slowly increasing the rotation, you can see that the curve gets greater and greater, and as I get then you kind of get back to the spiral effect. So I have the attraction set pretty high. I'm going to decrease that. I like to find it more pleasant to do slightly lower. So what I wanted to point out about this is each finger is adding energy to the system. So I can actually, but when I let up, the energy continues until it either reaches the center or spirals out and is no longer part of the scenario. So I can keep adding energy to the system and then eventually let it dissipate. I can hit the same note and then eventually let it dissipate. So it lends itself to kind of merry-go-round kind of effects where you're pushing and then pushing it around each time. You're not really speeding it up, but you can contribute energy and keep it going in kind of a whirlpool. And then one of the things my son likes to do a lot is to do glissandos. So what's interesting is if you go, right now you notice that it's going counterclockwise. If I go in that direction, I get one kind of effect. If I go against that, I get a different effect. So it has this kind of grain to it. And you can go with the grain, go against the grain, and you can also eliminate the grain by turning off the rotation, for example. And if you were to turn off the rotation and the attraction, then suddenly it's a slowly fading instrument again. So it's a lot of these things were part of the design from the beginning, and a lot of them just kind of came out of some of the things I had to do to make it work in general. So I'm pretty pleased with the range of things you're able to do with it. I need to add basically controls for the speed at which updates are made so that you can make it much faster, and then a few other controls. So probably I'll use the left side of the launch pad for one and the right side for another. And then the bottom here is just the usual thing that I do where you can change the color, which tends to keep my son pretty engaged with it. Anyway, so I'm pretty pleased with it, and I hope that you enjoyed the quick demo. Anyway.